National Archives, Washington, D.C., September 3, 1946. Dr. Robert Erickson carefully opens the captured Japanese military document, one of thousands seized during the occupation of Japan. He is a Japanese language specialist and psychologist, part of the team analyzing enemy records to understand how the Pacific War was experienced from the Japanese perspective. Most documents contain routine administrative matters, supply requisitions, personnel transfers, tactical orders, but this one is different. It's a confidential report from Colonel Yoshio Nakamura, commandant of Zensuji POW camp, written in December 1944 to Imperial Japanese Army Headquarters. Erickson's hands pause as he reads the opening paragraph. Despite 2 years of captivity under harsh conditions, despite hunger, disease, and humiliation, the American prisoners maintain extraordinary psychological resistance. Their eyes never show the defeated spirit we observe in British and Dutch prisoners. They organize, they resist. They maintain military discipline even without weapons or hope of liberation. We have beaten them, starved them, isolated their leaders, yet their spirit remains intact. This is not individual defiance, but systematic cultural characteristic. I submit that we have underestimated the psychological resilience of American military personnel, and that this represents strategic vulnerability in our understanding of the enemy. Erickson reads the paragraph 3 times. This isn't propaganda or boasting. This is a Japanese military officer, writing to his superiors, admitting that American POWs possessed psychological strength that Japanese methods couldn't break. It is the first of dozens of such admissions he will find in captured documents over the next months. The context of Japanese POW camps in the Pacific War was brutal by any measure. Of approximately 140,000 Allied prisoners captured by Japan, American, British, Australian, Dutch, and others, roughly 27% died in captivity, compared to 4% of Allied prisoners held by Germany. The death rate reflected both deliberate cruelty and systemic indifference rooted in Japanese military culture that viewed surrender as ultimate dishonor. Japanese military doctrine, influenced by Bushido ideology and codified in the 1941 Field Service Code, explicitly stated that soldiers should die rather than surrender. Consequently, Japanese forces treated prisoners with contempt, viewing them as having forfeited any claim to respect or humane treatment by choosing captivity over death. American POWs, approximately 36,000 captured in the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, and other early Japanese victories, faced starvation rations, forced labor, inadequate medical care, physical abuse, and psychological torture designed to break their will and force cooperation with Japanese propaganda efforts. The standard narrative of American POW experience focused on the physical horrors: the Bataan Death March, the Thai-Burma Railway, hell ships transporting prisoners in deadly conditions, camp brutality. These horrors were real and well documented through survivor testimony. But Dr. Erickson and his team at the National Archives were discovering another dimension to the story through captured Japanese documents, that despite these conditions, American POWs had maintained psychological resistance that their captors found baffling and threatening. The Japanese had expected broken men. Instead, they encountered organized resistance that persisted even when physically helpless. The documents Erickson was examining included camp commandant reports to headquarters, interrogation records, propaganda assessments, medical reports, and most revealing confidential analysis reports where Japanese officers wrote candidly about challenges they faced managing American prisoners. These documents had been captured during the occupation of Japan in 1945-46, seized from military archives before they could be destroyed. Many were marked confidential or secret, indicating they were intended for limited internal circulation rather than public consumption. This made them uniquely valuable. They weren't propaganda aimed at external audiences, but honest assessments, written by Japanese officers to inform their superiors. Erickson realized he was reading evidence of psychological warfare, where the prisoners, despite being physically defeated and captured, had won a kind of victory their captors acknowledged but couldn't counter. The documents revealed that Japanese military authorities had recognized American POW resistance as a systemic problem that undermined their efforts at every level, from camp management to propaganda exploitation to labor extraction. Colonel Nakamura's report was the first discovery, but Erickson quickly found it wasn't isolated. He assembled a team of translators and analysts to systematically review all captured documents related to POW camp management. What emerged was a pattern of Japanese acknowledgement, recorded in their own words in their own documents, that American prisoners possessed psychological resilience that exceeded Japanese expectations and defied their methods of control. A report from Major Takeshi Suehiro, commandant of Omori camp near Tokyo, dated April 1943. The American prisoners maintain what they call military courtesy, even in captivity. They salute their own officers, maintain rank structure, organize themselves into units despite having no weapons or authority. When we punish their officers, the enlisted men maintain discipline. When we isolate their leaders, new leaders emerge. This is contrary to our understanding of prisoners, who should be broken individuals focused only on survival. Instead, we observe collective organization that persists regardless of our efforts to suppress it. Another document, from interrogator Lieutenant Kenji Ishimoto, described his frustration attempting to extract propaganda statements from American prisoners. The Americans refused cooperation even when cooperation would improve their treatment. We offered better food, medical care, reduced labor assignments to prisoners who would make radio broadcasts criticizing American war effort. Nearly all refused. Those few who agreed provided statements so obviously insincere that they were useless for propaganda purposes. When I asked one prisoner why he refused better treatment in exchange for simple words, he said, "Because I'm still a soldier." This mentality is incomprehensible to us, but clearly widespread among Americans. Dr. Erickson brought these documents to his supervisor, Dr. James Patterson, head of the Psychological Warfare Analysis Section. Jim, we're finding systematic evidence that American POWs maintained organized resistance throughout captivity. More significantly, the Japanese recognized this and documented it as a problem they couldn't solve. This isn't American propaganda about our own toughness. This is the enemy admitting they couldn't break our people. Patterson reviewed the documents carefully. This is extraordinary. We need to expand this research, find every document related to American POW psychology, behavior, resistance. If the Japanese documented this systematically, it could reveal not just what happened in the camps, but what cultural or training factors made American prisoners psychologically resilient. That could have implications for future military training and preparation. Erickson assembled a team of 6 translators and analysts. Their mission: document the Japanese perspective on American POW psychology through captured enemy records. It would become one of the most revealing projects of the early post-war period. Winter, 1946-1947. The systematic documentation begins. Over 6 months, Erickson's team reviewed approximately 4,200 documents related to POW camp operations, prisoner management, and related subjects. They found 183 documents that contained significant references to American POW psychology, behavior, or resistance. Each document was translated completely, analyzed for context, and cross-referenced with survivor testimony to verify accuracy. The documents revealed that Japanese camp authorities had identified specific behavioral patterns among American POWs that distinguished them from other Allied prisoners. Persistence of military structure. American POWs maintained rank hierarchy even without official recognition. Officers continued commanding. Enlisted men continued following orders. Military protocol was observed even in the absence of any enforcement mechanism. A report from Fukuoka Camp No. 1 noted, "The American prisoners operate as military unit despite being prisoners. Their senior officer, Colonel Beecher, issues daily orders that are followed by all American prisoners. We have beaten Colonel Beecher, placed him in solitary confinement, denied him food, yet when released he resumes command and the prisoners continue following his orders. We cannot identify the mechanism by which this authority is maintained." Collective resistance to cooperation. American POWs refused to cooperate with Japanese propaganda efforts, even when cooperation offered tangible benefits, and non-cooperation resulted in punishment. An intelligence report from Tokyo headquarters assessed, unlike European prisoners who often cooperate with propaganda efforts when material benefits are offered, American prisoners demonstrate remarkable unity in refusing cooperation. We believe this is due to strong patriotic indoctrination and fear of social shame if they cooperate. The American concept of traitor appears to be more psychologically powerful than physical hardship. Organized sabotage of forced labor. American POWs working in mines, factories, and construction engaged in systematic slowdowns, tool breakage, and subtle sabotage that reduced productivity without being provable as deliberate. A labor supervisor's report from a copper mine complained, American prisoners work at approximately 60% efficiency of Japanese workers, despite being given adequate food rations and rest periods. Tools break frequently. Work is done incorrectly, requiring rework. When individual prisoners are punished, efficiency does not improve. This is clearly organized resistance, but we cannot prove deliberate sabotage. Our production quotas are not being met due to prisoner inefficiency. Maintenance of morale through humor and defiance. Multiple documents referenced American POW use of humor, sarcasm, and small acts of defiance that maintained morale despite harsh conditions. One particularly bewildered camp guard wrote, "The Americans laugh and make jokes even when being punished. They mock us in English knowing we do not understand the words but understanding the tone. This behavior should demoralize them, but appears instead to strengthen their spirit." Spring 1947. The medical perspective emerges. Among the captured documents were medical reports from Japanese camp doctors who had been tasked with keeping prisoners minimally functional for labor while using minimum resources. These medical records provided another perspective on American POW psychology. Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto, chief medical officer for POW camps in the Philippines, had written a confidential report in June 1943 comparing mortality rates among different nationalities. American prisoners show lower mortality rate than British or Dutch prisoners, despite receiving identical rations and treatment. Medical examination reveals that American prisoners maintain better psychological state, which correlates with improved survival. They encourage each other, share food with sick comrades, maintain hope of liberation despite no evidence that liberation is coming. This psychological resilience appears to have measurable physiological effects. American prisoners recover from illness more frequently and maintain body weight better than other nationalities under identical conditions. Another medical report, from Dr. Kenji Matsumoto at Omori Camp, analyzed psychological factors in survival. Observation of prisoner behavior during illness reveals that American prisoners rarely give up in the way other prisoners do. The phenomenon of prisoner deciding to die, simply losing will to live and expiring despite no immediate fatal condition, is common among British and Dutch prisoners but rare among Americans. American prisoners continue attempting to survive even when death seems inevitable. This tenacity is medically interesting and strategically concerning, as it means American prisoners require fewer resources to achieve same survival rate as other prisoners. Dr. Erickson found this particularly significant. The Japanese medical officers are documenting that American POW psychology had measurable physiological effects. This isn't just about toughness in abstract sense, it's about how psychological resilience translated into actual survival rates. The Japanese noticed this, measured it, and reported it to headquarters. He cross-referenced the Japanese medical assessments with American POW survivor testimony. Captain James Bradley, who had survived 3 years in Cabanatuan camp, provided oral history that confirmed the Japanese observations. "We had a system. Nobody dies alone. Nobody gives up. If a guy got sick, we'd take shifts sitting with him, talking to him, telling him stories about home, making him promise to survive to see his family again. We shared what little food we had. The officers enforced discipline that everyone had to participate in survival efforts. It wasn't just about individual toughness. It was organized collective resistance against despair. The Japanese had observed this behavior and correctly identified it as systematic rather than individual phenomenon. They had recognized it was learned behavior, not innate characteristic, which made it reproducible and therefore strategically concerning. Summer 1947. The comparison with Japanese POWs. One of the most revealing categories of documents compared American POW behavior with Japanese POW behavior. After major battles like Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, American forces had captured significant numbers of Japanese soldiers, men who had surrendered despite their cultural conditioning that death was preferable to capture. Japanese military intelligence had conducted studies comparing the psychology of American prisoners in Japanese camps with Japanese prisoners in American camps. The contrast troubled them deeply. A report from Colonel Hideo Yamashita, who interviewed repatriated Japanese POWs after the war, revealed the psychological impact. Our soldiers who surrendered to Americans report that they were treated humanely, given food, medical care, respect. American guards did not beat or humiliate them. This is disturbing for two reasons. First, it suggests American soldiers maintain professional military behavior even toward defeated enemies, which is contrary to our assumptions about American savagery. Second, and more concerning, our soldiers report that American captors displayed no contempt for prisoners. Americans appear not to view surrender as ultimate dishonor, but as unfortunate circumstance of warfare. This fundamental difference in perspective creates strategic disadvantage. American soldiers who are captured maintain psychological health and dignity because they do not internalize the shame that our culture associates with capture. They remain functional military personnel even in captivity. Our soldiers who are captured experience severe psychological trauma because we have taught them that capture is worse than death. We have created a system where our own cultural values weaken our soldiers psychologically, while American cultural values strengthen theirs even in defeat. Dr. Erickson highlighted this passage for his team. The Japanese had identified a fundamental asymmetry in psychological warfare. American military culture prepared soldiers to maintain dignity and functionality, even in capture. Japanese military culture created profound shame around capture that psychologically destroyed Japanese soldiers who became POWs. The result was that American POWs remained threats to their captors while Japanese POWs often became cooperative due to psychological trauma of having failed by their own cultural standards. He noted the strategic implications. This suggests that cultural attitudes toward combat, honor, and capture have measurable effects on prisoner behavior and military effectiveness. The Japanese created a system that made their soldiers fight fanatically to avoid capture, but also made those who were captured psychologically devastated. Americans created a system that allowed soldiers to remain psychologically functional even when captured, turning POW camps into sites of continued resistance rather than total defeat. Autumn 1947. The propaganda failure documentation. The Japanese had made extensive efforts to exploit American POWs for propaganda purposes. Radio broadcasts criticizing the U.S. government, filmed statements, written declarations. The captured documents revealed that these efforts had been almost complete failures, and Japanese propaganda officials had analyzed why. A report from the Information Bureau of the Imperial Japanese Army, dated November 1943. Project to recruit American POWs for radio propaganda has yielded minimal results. Of 847 American prisoners approached with offers of better treatment in exchange for radio broadcasts, 841 refused absolutely. 6 agreed initially but provided statements of such obvious insincerity that they were unusable. When interrogators pressed these 6 for more convincing statements, 5 recanted and accepted punishment rather than cooperate further. Analysis suggests several factors. American prisoners fear social shame more than physical hardship. They believe cooperation will mark them permanently as traitors, even if they survive the war. They trust that America will win the war, and they will be held accountable for cooperation. They maintain faith in their cause, despite being captured and subjected to harsh treatment. This combination of factors creates psychological resistance to propaganda exploitation that we have been unable to overcome. Another document detailed an attempted propaganda operation that had backfired spectacularly. In 1944, Japanese propagandists filmed American POWs in a staged baseball game intended to show that prisoners were treated well. The film was meant for international audiences, particularly neutral countries. The report on the operation noted, the American prisoners agreed to participate in the filmed baseball game in exchange for additional food rations. However, during filming, prisoners deliberately played incompetently, making obvious errors, falling theatrically, and behaving in exaggerated manner clearly intended to signal that the film was staged propaganda. When we ordered them to play properly, they complied with continued subtle mockery. The resulting film is useless as propaganda because any viewer can observe that the prisoners are clearly performing under duress, rather than genuinely enjoying recreational activities. This incident demonstrates that even when American prisoners cooperate superficially, they find methods to undermine the propaganda value of their cooperation. They are more sophisticated in understanding propaganda than we anticipated, and they actively resist even when resistance is costly to them personally. Dr. Erickson's team found multiple examples of this pattern. Japanese authorities attempting to exploit American POWs for propaganda, prisoners refusing or subtly undermining the efforts, Japanese officials documenting their frustration with American prisoners' psychological resistance. Winter 1947-1948. The leadership documentation. One subset of documents focused specifically on American POW leadership. How senior officers maintained command despite Japanese efforts to break their authority. These documents revealed Japanese fascination with and frustration at the persistence of American military hierarchy in captivity. Colonel Nakamura, whose initial report had started Erickson's research, had written a detailed analysis in March 1945. The American command structure in POW camps represents the most significant management challenge we face. Despite our efforts to eliminate American military hierarchy, we separate officers from enlisted men, we punish officers more harshly, we deny officers any official authority, the command structure persists and functions effectively. Example, in Zensuji Camp, we identified Colonel Thomas Harrison as senior American officer. We placed him in solitary confinement for 6 months to break his authority. When released, he immediately resumed command. We discovered that during his isolation, an elaborate communication system had been maintained. Prisoners assigned to work details near his confinement would whistle coded messages. He would respond through predetermined signals, and his orders would be disseminated through the camp. The sophistication of this system suggests extensive planning and collective cooperation. We have beaten American officers publicly to humiliate them before their men. This does not reduce their authority. We have offered privileged treatment to enlisted men who inform on their officers. They refuse. We have promoted enlisted men to positions of authority as reward for cooperation. Other prisoners do not recognize this authority and continue following their actual officers. The American military system creates officers who maintain authority through competence and earned respect rather than merely through rank or coercion. This makes their command structure resilient to our methods of disruption. We can remove symbols of authority, we can inflict physical punishment, but we cannot remove the actual basis of their authority, which exists in the relationship between officers and men, rather than in any external enforcement mechanism. A separate report analyzed a specific incident where Japanese guards had forced American POWs to witness the execution of their own officers as punishment for escape attempts. The report noted with evident confusion, the execution of Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Chen for escape attempt was intended to demonstrate consequences of resistance and to demoralize American prisoners. Instead, the executed officers became martyrs who inspired continued resistance. Prisoners speak of them with reverence and invoke their memory as reason to continue fighting. We have learned that killing American leaders does not eliminate their influence but transforms them into symbols that may be more powerful than when they were alive. Spring 1948. The documentation of escape attempts and resistance. The captured documents included extensive records of American POW escape attempts and resistance activities. Records kept because Japanese military regulations required documentation of security incidents. These records revealed both the persistence of American resistance and Japanese authorities' analysis of why their countermeasures were ineffective. A security report from Changi Prison in Singapore documented 14 American escape attempts between March 1942 and August 1945. What struck Erickson wasn't the number of attempts but the Japanese analysis of the pattern. American prisoners attempt escape at rates far exceeding British or Dutch prisoners, despite being informed that recaptured escapees will be executed. Of 14 American escape attempts, 12 escapees were recaptured and executed. This has not deterred subsequent attempts. Analysis suggests that American prisoners view escape attempts as military duty regardless of survival probability. They appear to consider successful escape, or even unsuccessful attempt that ties up Japanese resources, as worthwhile contribution to war effort, even at cost of their lives. This mentality is strategically irrational from perspective of individual survival but strategically rational from perspective of continued military resistance. American prisoners understand that even failed escape attempts force us to devote resources to recapture and security, thereby fulfilling military purpose of causing maximum difficulty for enemy, even while prisoner. Another document detailed organized sabotage in POW work details. American prisoners working on railroad construction In mines and in factories engaged in systematic resistance that reduced productivity, American prisoners demonstrate remarkable creativity and sabotage that cannot be proven as deliberate. They discover and report safety hazards that delay work. They follow instructions with excessive literalism that slows productivity. They ask constant questions requiring supervisory time. They work diligently when directly observed but reduce pace when unobserved. They make mistakes that require rework. Tools are accidentally broken or damaged. Materials are incorrectly measured. When individual prisoners are punished for poor work, productivity does not improve. Other prisoners reduce their work rate in solidarity. When we increase punishment, work quality declines further through deliberate sabotage. When we decrease punishment and attempt positive incentives, prisoners still resist at every opportunity. We have concluded that American prisoners view reducing their labor productivity as military objective and organize collectively to achieve this objective regardless of personal consequences. Dr. Erickson's team cross-referenced these Japanese reports with survivor testimony. Former POW Lieutenant Colonel Edward Dias, who escaped from the Philippines, confirmed the Japanese observations in his debriefing. We considered it our duty to cause maximum trouble for the Japs even as prisoners. Every minute they spent guarding us, every resource they devoted to managing us was a minute and resource they couldn't use fighting. We remained soldiers even without weapons. Summer 1948. The comparative analysis with German POW camps. To provide context, Erickson's team analyzed documents about American POWs in German custody, roughly 95,000 Americans held in German camps during the war. The contrast with Japanese camps was stark and revealing. German camp commandants' reports, captured in Europe, showed similar observations about American POW behavior: maintenance of military structure, organized resistance, refusal to cooperate with propaganda. But the German response was notably different. A report from Stalag Luft III's commandant noted, "The American prisoners maintain discipline and organization. They attempt escapes regularly. They resist cooperation with intelligence efforts. However, they are manageable through proper military protocol. When treated according to Geneva Convention standards, adequate food, medical care, respect for rank, they behave as professional military prisoners. Their resistance is annoying but not uncontrollable." The difference was crucial. German camps, generally adhering more closely to Geneva Convention standards, created an environment where American POW resistance was persistent but didn't threaten camp stability. Japanese camps, treating prisoners brutally and contemptuously, created an environment where American POW resistance was both more desperate and more threatening to camp authority. A comparative analysis document that Erickson's team drafted noted, American POWs demonstrated consistent behavioral patterns regardless of captor nationality, maintenance of military structure, organized resistance, psychological resilience. However, the severity and impact of this resistance varied based on captor treatment. In German camps with relatively humane conditions, American resistance manifested primarily through escape attempts and refusal to provide military intelligence. In Japanese camps with brutal conditions, American resistance manifested through sabotage, collective defiance, and psychological warfare that genuinely threatened Japanese camp authority. Dr. Patterson, reviewing the comparative analysis, observed, "This suggests that American military training and culture created consistent behavioral patterns, but the expression of those patterns was influenced by camp conditions. The harsher the treatment, the more intense the resistance, which is counterintuitive from Japanese perspective, where harsh treatment was expected to break resistance. The Japanese created feedback loop where brutality generated resistance, which generated more brutality, which generated more resistance." Erickson added another observation. The Japanese documents repeatedly express confusion about American POW psychology. They expected broken men. They encountered organized resistance. They expected brutality to create submission. It created defiance. They expected prisoners to internalize shame of capture. Americans maintained pride in continued military service even as prisoners. The Japanese fundamentally misunderstood American psychology, and their camp policies reflected that misunderstanding throughout the war. Autumn, 1948. The final synthesis and report preparation. After 2 years of analysis, Dr. Erickson's team prepared a comprehensive report. Enemy assessment of American POW psychology. Analysis of captured Japanese documents, 1942-1945. The report synthesized findings from 183 captured documents, cross-referenced with 300-plus survivor testimonies, and presented systematic analysis of how Japanese military authorities had perceived and documented American POW behavior. The report's key findings: systematic Japanese acknowledgement of American psychological resilience. Japanese military documents consistently noted that American POWs maintained morale, organization, and resistance despite harsh conditions. This wasn't Allied propaganda, but enemy admission. Cultural factors in resistance. Japanese analysts identified specific American cultural characteristics that contributed to POW resilience: individualism combined with group loyalty, pragmatic rather than fatalistic worldview, separation of military defeat from personal honor, faith in eventual American victory, training and preparation. Japanese documents noted that American POWs appeared to have been better psychologically prepared for possibility of capture than Japanese soldiers, resulting in maintained functionality rather than psychological collapse when captured. Leadership resilience. American military leadership structure proved remarkably resilient to Japanese disruption efforts. Officers maintained authority through earned respect rather than coercion, making their command structure nearly impossible to eliminate through punishment or separation. Collective resistance. American POWs organized collective resistance, escape committees, sabotage coordination, intelligence networks that was sophisticated and persistent despite severe punishment for detected resistance activities. Propaganda immunity. American POWs demonstrated remarkable resistance to propaganda exploitation, refusing cooperation even when offered tangible benefits, suggesting strong ideological commitment and social shame around collaboration. The report concluded with strategic assessment. The captured Japanese documents revealed that American POWs waged effective psychological warfare against their captors, despite being physically defeated and imprisoned. They maintained military discipline, organized resistance, and psychological morale that forced Japanese authorities to devote disproportionate resources to POW camp management and security. The Japanese documented this resistance extensively, acknowledged they could not break it, and expressed concern about strategic implications of American psychological resilience. This suggests that American military culture and training created personnel who remained militarily effective even in captivity, a significant strategic advantage that Japanese authorities recognized but could not counter. The preservation of American POW psychological resilience, documented by the enemy themselves, represents a form of victory within defeat that deserves recognition and study for future military training applications. 1949-1952. Dissemination and application of findings. Erickson's report was classified initially but gradually disseminated to military education institutions. The findings influenced post-war military training, particularly in development of survival, evasion, resistance, and escape (SEER) programs. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College incorporated the findings into curriculum. The Japanese documents demonstrate that military personnel can maintain psychological effectiveness even in extreme adversity. This validates investment in training that emphasizes psychological resilience, unit cohesion, and continued military identity even when captured. The Air Force, developing survival training for pilots who might be shot down and captured, used the Japanese assessments as evidence that proper training could prepare personnel to resist enemy exploitation. Japanese interrogators noted that American prisoners who maintained psychological resilience were most effective at resisting intelligence extraction. Training should emphasize that capture does not end military service, but transforms it into different form of resistance. In 1950, Erickson was invited to brief senior military leadership on his findings. General Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, attended the briefing. After Erickson's presentation, Bradley commented, "Dr. Erickson, your research validates what we believed but couldn't prove, that American servicemen and women possess psychological strength that transcends physical circumstances. The enemy documented this in their own words. That's powerful testimony that should inform how we train and prepare future generations of military personnel." The research also influenced psychological understanding of resilience more broadly. Dr. Viktor Frankl's work on meaning and survival in Nazi concentration camps had established that psychological orientation influenced survival outcomes. Erickson's research provided military parallel. American POWs who maintained sense of continued military purpose and collective identity survived at higher rates than those who psychologically surrendered. By 1952, the report was declassified and published in academic journals. It received attention not just in military circles but in psychology, sociology, and cultural studies. The Japanese documents provided rare enemy perspective on American national character and military culture, testimony that was particularly credible because it came from adversaries who had no reason to praise American psychological strength, but documented it anyway because it was operationally significant. Dr. Erickson continued researching POW psychology throughout his career, eventually publishing a comprehensive book, The Unbroken Enemy Assessments of American POW Resilience in the Pacific War. The book made extensive use of captured Japanese documents, presenting them with full translations alongside survivor testimony. It became standard reference for understanding POW psychology and American military culture. Library of Congress, Washington, D.C., 1975. 30th Anniversary Symposium on the Pacific War. A major symposium brought together historians, veterans, psychologists, and military educators to discuss the Pacific War's legacy. Dr. Robert Erickson, now 73 and retired, was invited to present his research on Japanese assessments of American POW psychology. The audience included former POWs, some of whom were mentioned in the Japanese documents Erickson had translated decades earlier. Erickson stood before a screen displaying translations of Japanese documents, the actual words of enemy officers describing American prisoners they couldn't break. Ladies and gentlemen, particularly the veterans in this audience who survived Japanese captivity, I want to tell you what your enemies said about you when they thought no one but their superiors would read their words. They said your eyes never looked defeated. They said you maintained military discipline without weapons or official authority. They said you organized resistance even when resistance brought punishment. They said you refused to cooperate with propaganda even when cooperation offered better treatment. They said you maintained faith in American victory even when victory seemed impossible. They said they couldn't break your spirit despite 2, 3, 4 years of trying. This isn't American propaganda praising our own toughness. This is enemy testimony. Japanese military officers writing confidential reports to their headquarters, admitting that despite controlling your bodies, despite inflicting starvation and brutality, they never controlled your minds. You remained soldiers. You remained Americans. You remained unbowed in spirit even when physically helpless. Colonel Nakamura, commandant of Zensuji Camp, wrote that your psychological resilience was strategic vulnerability in Japanese understanding of Americans. He meant that as warning to his superiors, they had underestimated you, underestimated American culture, underestimated the strength that comes from freedom and dignity rather than from fanaticism and control. You waged psychological warfare without weapons. You maintained military effectiveness without freedom. You achieved victory of spirit even in defeat of circumstance. The Japanese documented this because it frustrated them, threatened them, forced them to devote resources to controlling you that they needed elsewhere. Your resistance mattered. Your unbroken spirits mattered. The enemy said so, in their own words, in documents they never intended you to see. That testimony, enemy acknowledgement of your strength, is perhaps the most credible testimony possible. They couldn't break you. They admitted they couldn't break you. And that admission is preserved in archives as eternal testimony to your extraordinary resilience. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes, veterans embracing each other and embracing the validation that enemy documents provided for suffering and resistance that had long been invisible except to those who experienced it. 21st century. The lessons endure and expand. The captured Japanese documents analyzed by Dr. R. Erickson's team remained available for ongoing research at the National Archives. As new generations of scholars examined them, additional insights emerged about American military culture, POW psychology, and cultural factors in resilience. Dr. Erickson passed away in 1989, but his research continued to influence military training, psychological study, and historical understanding. The SEER schools operated by all branches of U.S. military explicitly referenced the Japanese documents in their training materials. Your enemy documented that American prisoners maintained psychological resistance through organization, mutual support, and continued military identity. These are not innate characteristics but learned behaviors that training can develop. In 2005, a new analysis of the documents was published by Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist specializing in resilience. She examined the Japanese observations through modern psychological framework. The Japanese documented behaviors that contemporary psychology recognizes as resilience factors: social connection, sense of purpose, active coping, maintenance of identity, realistic optimism about eventual liberation. American POWs demonstrated these factors collectively rather than individually, suggesting that military training had successfully cultivated organizational resilience rather than merely individual toughness. Veterans organizations made use of the documents in educational programs. The American Defenders of Bataan and Corregidor organization included Japanese document translations in their museum exhibits and educational materials. Former POW families found validation in enemy acknowledgement of their relatives' resistance. The suffering hadn't been passive victimization, but active military service under impossible conditions. In 2015, on the 70th anniversary of VJ Day, the National Archives mounted an exhibition titled The Unbroken Spirit: Enemy Testimony on American POW Resilience. The exhibition displayed Japanese documents alongside photographs of POW camps and testimony from survivors. The introductory text stated, "These documents provide unique testimony, enemies acknowledging the strength of those they captured but could not break." Japanese military officers, writing to their superiors, admitted that American prisoners maintained psychological resistance that frustrated Japanese camp management, propaganda efforts, and exploitation of POW labor. This resistance, documented by the enemy themselves, represents a form of victory within defeat, the preservation of human dignity and military identity, even in captivity's darkest conditions. The exhibition concluded with a quote from Colonel Nakamura's original December 1944 report. "Their eyes never show the defeated spirit we observe in other prisoners. Despite everything we have done, they remain unbroken." This represents something in American character we did not understand and still cannot defeat. It was enemy tribute to American resilience, preserved in captured documents, testifying to strength that brutality could not break and time could not diminish. War reveals character through adversity. Enemy testimony provides credible validation, and psychological strength can achieve victory even in physical defeat. If this story made you reflect on how human dignity and collective resilience can transcend brutal circumstances, and how proper training and cultural values can prepare people to maintain their humanity, even when everything else is taken from them, share it, because what we understand about the sources of true strength, not in weapons but in spirit, we never forget.